A seed sat in the dark for 2,000 years. No water, no soil, no sunlight. Just stillness, inside a clay jar buried beneath the ruins of an ancient fortress in the Judean desert. And then, in 2005, a botanist planted it. 6 weeks later, it sprouted. What grew from that seed wasn't just a plant. It was a living bridge between the world of the Bible and the world we live in today. A tree that hadn't existed on Earth for over a millennium, suddenly standing in a courtyard in Israel, its leaves catching the same desert wind that moved through the pages of Scripture. This story is not legend. It is not a parable. It is documented science, published in peer-reviewed journals, confirmed by radiocarbon dating, and witnessed by researchers who could barely believe what they were seeing. Stay with me, because what this seed reveals about the ancient world, about the plants in Scripture, about the healing knowledge that was nearly lost forever, is more extraordinary than almost anything you will read today. And the details buried inside this story will change the way you think about what the Bible actually contains. Masada is a place that carries its own kind of gravity. Built by Herod the Great on a mesa rising nearly 500 meters above the Dead Sea, it was one of the most sophisticated palace complexes of the ancient world. Storehouses, bathhouses, cisterns, mosaic floors, all perched on top of a sheer rock face in one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth. In 73 CE, it became the site of one of history's most famous last stands, when a community of Jewish rebels held out against the Roman army for months before the fortress finally fell. When Israeli archaeologist Yigael Yadin excavated Masada in the 1960s, his team discovered something that seemed unremarkable at the time: a small collection of seeds inside a storage jar. They were catalogued, stored, and largely forgotten for 40 years. Nobody suspected that those seeds were still alive. Dr. Sarah Salin is a medical doctor and researcher based in Jerusalem, with a long-standing interest in ancient and traditional plant medicines. In the early 2000s, she began working with Dr. Elaine Soloway, a botanist and expert in arid agriculture at the Arava Institute in Israel's Negev Desert. Together, they asked a question that most scientists would have dismissed as a waste of time. What if some of those ancient seeds could still germinate? The seeds they were given included the Masada specimens, 3 date palm seeds, each approximately 2,000 years old, confirmed by radiocarbon dating to have been stored sometime between 155 BCE and 64 CE. Soloway soaked them in warm water, treated them with a nutrient and hormone solution, planted them in soil, and waited. On June 12, 2005, one of them broke the surface. They named it Methuselah. To understand what Methuselah's survival means, you have to understand what the date palm meant in the ancient world. The Hebrew name for the date palm is tamar, and it appears throughout Scripture in ways that reveal how deeply embedded this tree was in the daily experience of biblical civilization. Deborah, the prophet and judge of Israel, held court beneath a date palm in Judges 4:5. The righteous man in Psalm 92:12 is compared to a palm tree that flourishes even in difficult soil. In Revelation 7:9, the great multitude before the throne of God holds palm branches in their hands. In John 12:13, the crowds that welcomed Jesus into Jerusalem waved palm fronds. These weren't incidental details. The date palm was woven into the symbolic language of Scripture because it was woven into the practical reality of life in the ancient Near East. It provided food, shade, timber, fiber for rope and baskets, and sap that could be fermented. It was called the Tree of Life across multiple ancient civilizations, and for good reason. A single mature palm could produce hundreds of kilograms of dates per year. And dates themselves are extraordinarily dense in calories, natural sugars, potassium, magnesium, and fiber. In a desert environment, the date palm was the difference between survival and starvation. But here is the detail that makes Methuselah's resurrection genuinely startling. The date palm that once grew throughout ancient Judea, the specific variety cultivated in the region around the Dead Sea, celebrated across the ancient world for the particular quality of its fruit, had gone extinct. The Judean date palm disappeared from the historical and botanical record sometime in the medieval period, its groves destroyed during centuries of conflict and environmental change. Ancient writers had praised this variety with extraordinary enthusiasm. The Roman historian Pliny the Elder described the dates of Judea as among the finest in the known world. The Jewish historian Josephus wrote of palm forests stretching across the Jordan Valley. The fruit was considered medicinal, used for digestive complaints, respiratory problems, and as a general tonic. It appeared on ancient coins, it decorated the walls of the temple, and then it was gone. For over 1,000 years, the Judean date palm existed only in texts, in carvings, in coins, a ghost of a tree remembered in the written record but absent from the living world. Until Methuselah grew. When Methuselah matured enough to be studied genetically, what researchers found was remarkable. The tree's DNA showed it to be genuinely distinct from any living date palm variety. A genetic profile that had been absent from the earth for centuries, now walking back into existence from a seed that had been waiting in a jar in the dark. Subsequent germinations followed. Using seeds recovered from other archaeological sites, caves in the Judean desert, storage areas from the same biblical-era time frame, researchers managed to grow additional ancient palms. They named them Hannah, Adam, Jonah, Uriel, Boaz, and Judith. By 2020, Methuselah had produced pollen, Judith had flowered, and cross-pollination between the ancient trees produced fruit. Actual dates from a variety of palm that had not existed on Earth for 1,000 years. The researchers who tasted them described the fruit as sweet, with a texture and flavor profile unlike any commercial date currently available. A flavor lost to history for a millennium had returned. Here is where this story moves beyond botanical curiosity and into something with real implications. The ancient Judean date palm was not just food, it was medicine. Historical sources describe its fruit being used across a wide range of conditions. The dates were eaten to improve digestion and relieve constipation. The pollen was used in preparations for female reproductive health. The fruit was prescribed for respiratory complaints. Pliny wrote about its specific properties. Medieval Arab physicians continued describing the medicinal uses of Judean dates long after the trees themselves had disappeared, drawing on older texts that preserved the knowledge even as the source vanished. Now that these trees exist again, researchers have the opportunity to study their biochemistry directly, to measure their actual polyphenol content, their antioxidant capacity, their specific compounds, and compare them against the historical medical claims. That research is ongoing. The early findings suggest the ancient variety may have a different nutritional profile than modern cultivated dates, with potentially higher concentrations of certain beneficial compounds. We may be on the edge of recovering not just a tree, but an entire pharmacological tradition that was sealed inside that clay jar at Masada and is only now becoming available again. In 2021, a new archaeological survey of desert caves, driven partly by concerns that looters were stripping sites ahead of professional excavation, uncovered a cache of materials in what became known as the Cave of Horror, a site so difficult to access that its contents had survived untouched since the 2nd century CE. Among the materials recovered were plant specimens, coins, and personal documents belonging to Jewish refugees who had hidden in the cave during the Bar Kokhba revolt against Rome, around 135 CE. The plant specimens included seeds and agricultural materials that offered a window into what people were eating, cultivating, and carrying with them in the final moments before they died in that cave. Some of those species are plants named in Scripture. Some are varieties that no longer exist in the region. Each one is a data point in a larger picture of the botanical world that the Bible describes. A world that was more medically sophisticated, more ecologically rich, and more deliberately cultivated than most modern readers have ever imagined. The story of Methuselah forces a reconsideration. If a seed could survive 2,000 years in a clay jar and still germinate, if the tree described and celebrated throughout biblical scripture could be brought back from extinction using ancient plant material, then the botanical references throughout the Bible deserve to be read with far more attention than most people give them. When scripture describes the healing properties of specific plants, those descriptions were not written by people who were guessing or mythologizing. They were written by people who lived inside a botanical culture that was ancient even to them. People who had inherited thousands of years of accumulated practical knowledge about what grew in their land and what it could do. The date palm was not celebrated in Psalm 92 because it was a pretty tree. It was celebrated because it was a tree that sustained life, that healed bodies, that marked the landscape of a civilization. When Deborah sat beneath the palm and judged Israel, she sat beneath what every person in her world understood to be a symbol of endurance, productivity, and deep-rooted strength. There is something almost impossible to sit with quietly when you think about what Methuselah actually is. A seed planted in the time of Herod the Great. A seed that survived the fall of Masada, the destruction of the temple, the entire arc of Roman history, the rise of Christianity, the spread of Islam, the Crusades, the Ottoman Empire, the World Wars, and the founding of the modern state of Israel, and then germinated in a pot in the Negev desert in 2005 under the hands of a botanist who almost didn't try. There are theologians who see in this story something that transcends botany. The date palm is the tree of life in the ancient Near Eastern imagination. The tree that was lost has been found. The seed that appeared dead was alive the entire time, waiting for conditions that would allow it to become what it was always meant to be. Whether or not you read that as theology, it is undeniably a story about the persistence of life in forms we cannot always see or measure, a truth that the authors of Scripture understood with a depth and clarity that we are only beginning to recover. The work continues. Researchers in Israel are now cultivating a small grove of ancient Judean date palms, studying their genetics, analyzing their fruit, and attempting to understand what made this variety so celebrated in the ancient world. The goal is not museum preservation. The goal is to understand what knowledge was embedded in these plants, what the people who grew them, ate them, and prescribed them knew, and whether that knowledge has anything to offer medicine today. The early signs are promising. And Methuselah, the oldest tree grown from an ancient seed, is still standing in a courtyard at the Arava Institute, producing pollen each spring, participating in the slow and deliberate effort to bring a lost world back into conversation with the living one. A 2,000-year-old seed from the pages of the Bible, growing in the desert where the Bible was written. If that doesn't make you look at your copy of Scripture differently, I'm not sure what will. Hit that like button if this story opened something up for you. Leave a comment below. What part of this surprised you most? I read every single one. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and turn on the notification bell. We keep going deeper into the places where ancient wisdom and modern discovery meet, and this is only the beginning.